Good afternoon, good morning. I'm Mark Rhodes. I'm the Marketing Director at read.co.uk. I've got a couple of challenges. The first challenge is for me, and that is, as Andy said, I've got about 45 slides to get through in about 15 or 20 minutes. So I'm going to go through at a bit of a pace. The challenge for you guys, if you haven't seen this research before, and hopefully you won't have done, is really just to see if you can pick out one or two little key insights that you can take back to your place of work and share with your colleagues, whoever sits next to you, etc. So what I'm going to share with you is not earth-shattering, particularly, but it's a really insightful kind of set of stats and research that we've done. I've just got to find my clicker. Here it is. So you don't have to keep looking at that. So what do your candidates, your target candidates really want? First things first, I just want to make sure that everybody knows who we are. Hopefully you'll have heard of read.co.uk, but I have the obligatory opening slides which just describe a little bit about who we are, why we think that we're qualified to talk to you about recruitment and jobs and employment and careers and candidates. So this is 1960. This is the very first ever Reed office, which opened in Hounslow by the founder, Sir Alec Reed, who is still a very active member of the team. Skip forward to 1995, this is read.co.uk, the very first version on the right-hand screen as you see it here. And we were, in fact, the very first website of a recruitment agency business anywhere in the world. And today, there's read.co.uk. So we are no longer a website of a recruitment agency. We are what I would probably describe as a kind of pure play job board. So we get about 8 million uniques a month, about 50,000 new jobs posted every week. And you can see our somewhat distinctive ad campaign creative in the background on that slide there. So that's enough about read.co.uk. So let's move to the research. So the research was carried out online. This is read.co.uk job seekers or candidates. This took place in February 2016. Sample size of about 2,500 to 3,000 candidates. All industries, all age groups, all experience levels and salary levels, okay? So that's the pretext to what we did. We ran this research the first time last year at the same point in time. And really, at that point, our kind of key objective, or our hypothesis, if you like, was that there's a disconnectedness between the expectations that candidates have, the candidates that you want have, and the experience that we as recruiters are able to deliver to them. And actually that's what we wanted to explore originally. So we started off with some fairly simple questions. And the first one was simply about where you start your job search. So nothing too profound here. And in terms of the question that we were asking here was, where is the very first place that you looked when you decided it was time to look for a new job? And 50% say they go to a job board. So good news for us at read.co.uk, good news for some of our friends at the other job boards. Whether they're niche, whether they're multi-specialist, job boards are firmly part of the fabric of the kind of candidate attraction landscape. Next up was Google, so 12% told us that Google is the very first place that they look. So if you, as recruiters, have a paid or organic or both search strategy, this is something to bear in mind, get it right. It's a very competitive space out there, so whether you're a job board, a recruitment agency, or an in-house recruiter, as most of you are competing, and you're competing in that very competitive landscape of paid and organic search. Perhaps surprising, 11% told us that they go to Job Centre Plus first. And this indexed very highly against young people, particularly school-leaving, college-leaving age. 9% go to a recruitment consultancy first. And actually, this one over-indexed against older, more experienced, higher-earning job seekers. So job seekers, candidates who know their industry, they know exactly what they're looking for. They know the recruitment businesses who will best serve them and what they're looking for in their industry. And then finally, company websites. We, as in-house recruiters, all know the importance and the value of our employer brand and having a fantastic online experience for candidates, even if they're just coming to find facts. They're coming to see what vacancies there are on a kind of speculative, relatively kind of passive footing. So this, again, was particularly popular amongst younger job seekers who may have target brands in sight if they're graduating from university, leaving school, moving into a career. So when we round all of those things together and we look at all of the things that we do, so that was the first thing that we do, this is what it looks like. So job sites still important. Company websites moves up the pecking order, so people starting to research the vacancies, the organizations to whom they're applying. Recruitment agencies still important. At the other end, you can see that trade magazines don't really enjoy much success anymore in terms of candidate attraction. The one that surprises me here, probably newspapers, which is roughly in the middle. Social networks, I think for all of those of us who work in recruitment and for all we read about social recruiting, perhaps it's less of a direct response channel. For us, social media, social recruiting is hugely important. It's hugely a part of the fabric of how we recruit these days. But actually, Twitter, Facebook, whatever your kind of social weapon of choice, for us and for me, it's very much about telling a story. It's about building a brand. It's about adding personality. It's about building tone to your communications to potential candidates, rather necessarily than it being a direct response channel. So moving on, looking for your next job takes over your life. So what do we mean by this? So if you think back probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you're looking for a job, chances are you're using traditional media to do that. And so if I think back to when I first entered the online recruitment world, excitingly, in the end of 1999 it was, in fact, I found that job at that time with Total Jobs through The Guardian. And I found it because every Monday, The Guardian published a recruitment advertising slot for media and graduate vacancies. And actually, at that point in time, I knew that Monday was my day for recruitment. And actually, if I'd looked on Thursday, I might have been looking in the charity or the public sector. So there were certain kind of points in time that we knew as job seekers, we could go and see what jobs there were. Where I grew up in Shropshire, the Shropshire Star still has recruitment advertising every Thursday evening, and that's what they've done for the last 50 years, I suspect. However, the kind of digital age has changed that, as we all know. We are constantly connected. All of us here will be sitting next to our smartphone, and if you're not looking at it now, chances are you'll be looking at it in another few minutes. This really influences the times at which people look for a job, perhaps unsurprisingly. So nearly half of us look when we get home from work. Good news for employers, because it suggests that we're not necessarily spending our work day looking for a new job. But I think what surprised us more was the fact that 38% told us that when they wake up, they start looking for a job. Similarly, 33%, and if that's 33% is the same 38% as we're talking about who look when they get up in the morning. They're looking when they go to bed. So actually, that's a really all-consuming experience. Most of us probably use our smartphone as our alarm clock. Most of us probably just have a quick look on Twitter or something before we go to sleep. So that connectedness means that job seeking, when you're really actively in the hunt, is a really kind of all-consuming experience. Just to kind of add a bit of color to that, 88% of job seekers do use mobile and devices. So whether that's browsing on the train home, whether that's sitting down with an app and actually spending time, this is a kind of firm part of what we do. And then 56% will actually allow themselves to kind of use up some of that vital storage space on their smartphone and actually download an app. And at Read.co.uk, we have an app, and we see that this really kind of nurtures some candidate loyalty. You know, actually, if people are investing in your brand, investing in your app. So if you've got an app or if you've got an employment section within your app, think quite carefully about what that proposition is to the candidates you're trying to attract. So next up, no surprise perhaps here, number one candidate concern is salary. So one of the things in this research that we were keen to understand was when job seekers are applying for a job, what is it in a job posting, in a job ad, in a piece of communication which is going to prompt them to want to apply? So actually, salary and benefits comes in at the very top across the broad audience area. Next is convenience, so how easy it is to get to work, where it is, what the hours are, how it will fit with your life. Day-to-day responsibilities, learning and development, career progression, and then reputation and culture, which I think kind of talks to some of the references we've already made, perhaps to employer brand. So these change depending on the kinds of job seekers you're looking for in terms of seniority, in terms of career stage, in terms of earnings. 67% of all job seekers are more likely to apply for a job when that salary is displayed. So if you are in a position to include a salary, to include remuneration details as part of your job postings, as part of your advertising, as part of your communications, this will help you to drive more applications and hopefully more suitable applications for your positions. If you're recruiting for the up to 20K bracket, so perhaps apprenticeships, school leavers, graduates, etc., convenience is really important. And actually, we found this most particularly with people who are looking at apprenticeships. Yes, they want to go and earn a wage. Yes, they want to get their foot in the door and actually start a career. But equally as important is, how am I going to get to my vacancy? How am I going to be able to get to work and fulfill this opportunity that's being presented to me? Salary takes a second seat to convenience for that salary group. As we move up, salary becomes more important, clearly. And actually, when we get to the kind of highest salary level that we were analysing here, 50K plus, salary is still very important, but actually this is when culture starts to become a bit more important, because actually at that stage of your career, chances are you've experienced more than one workplace culture, and actually you understand the impact that it can have on your day-to-day working life. Managing great expectations. So you'll remember, hopefully at the start, I talked about this kind of disconnectedness between what it is that candidates have as their expectations of the recruitment process and what it is as in-house recruiters, as recruiters in general, we are able to deliver and how well we're matching. So perhaps unsurprising, 91% of people, candidates who apply for a job expect to receive confirmation of an application. I think it's fairly basic. It might be via email, chances are it will be. It might be via text, you might even get a phone call. 70% expect to receive that confirmation within 24 hours. No surprise there again. I don't think that's particularly demanding. However, and we're talking about getting the basics right here, 14% told us that they always receive confirmation, which means that 15% say that they hardly ever or never receive confirmation. So there is a kind of, I guess there's a common courtesy there. This is how I would like to be treated. But similarly, we start to kind of get into this territory of recruitment as a customer service, and we'll come on to speak about this in a moment. But it's about getting the basics right. 81% expect to be informed of an unsuccessful application. So it's not just about communicating with the people who you think are great. It's about communicating with people who have taken the time to contact you. So if you don't get back in touch with people who've applied for your vacancies, what does that mean? So if you don't get back to people within 5 days, 26% will actually assume that they've been unsuccessful. They'll move on. And if it gets to 2 weeks, then you've pretty much lost out on that talent. So if you're building talent pipelines based on applications, if you're trying to attract candidates who at some stage you're going to deal with, but you're not in a position for whatever reason to communicate with them, there's a really good chance you're going to lose out, and it's a really good chance you're going to lose out to your competitors. I know it's really, really basic, but I guess the way that I continue to see this, the more that we look at this data, is really, really simple, and that's if I was applying for a job tomorrow, and thankfully for me it's not something that I've done for a while, but if I was to apply for a job tomorrow, how would I want to be treated? What are the touch points that I'm expecting? So how long should the hiring process take? Again, just exploring this disconnectedness between expectations and reality. Expert HR, I think, say about 6 weeks average time to hire. The Forum for In-House Recruiters last year, I think, did some research which was looking around averages of up to 10 weeks time to hire. From my own experience of hiring, I know that it always takes longer than I expect it to, probably double the time that I'm hoping. But what do candidates think? So if we look at the overall picture, between applying for a job and reaching the interview stage, 78% of candidates who apply for a job expect to be at the interview stage within 2 weeks. I don't know how much of a reality that is for your organizations. I think it's ambitious. 70% expect that within 3 weeks of applying for a job, they will be offered the job if they're successful. And actually, if we start to look at that by industry sector, so retail and marketing, a little bit more demanding than the average, so 83% expect to be at that interview within a fortnight. Technology and hospitality coming in at 85%. And then the most demanding candidates in terms of who we were talking to, 90% of accountants expect that within 2 weeks of applying for a job, they're going to be at interview. So ask yourselves whether, is that a reality? And actually, if it's not, it's no biggie as long as we're telling candidates, as long as we're communicating candidates at each and every step of the way. So this moves quite nicely into this whole kind of notion, this concept of recruitment as a customer service channel. I'm sure it's something that you're well aware of, that experience of brands. And having read around this subject a little bit, I think what's become really clear to me is that recruitment in many ways, because it's all digital now, is very like an e-commerce transaction. So when you go to a website, perhaps that you haven't used before, and you get your credit card out and you buy something, there are lots of touch points throughout that process, throughout that funnel. So the email, the SMS, the constant notification of where your order is, what's happened to your order, your transaction. And actually, I think these are the expectations that we as consumers now have. And why should recruitment be any different when you're applying for a job? So this is a somewhat subjective question, a poor hiring experience. So candidates who perceive the hiring experience that they have had in the past is poor. What does that mean? So 4 out of 5 told us that that would give them a negative view of the brand to whom they've applied. Just to add a bit more color, a quarter of those candidates say that they won't apply for future vacancies with that organization. So think carefully, if you haven't got the right opportunity but you're attracting the right candidates, think how you can nurture them in order to protect, safeguard, and build your kind of brand and your reputation. 26% say that they'll share any negative recruitment experience with a friend or relative, and 30% say that they're less likely to use an organization's products or services again. And actually, this is slightly lower than other research that we've seen, where a poor recruitment experience, a poor application process can be quite damaging. So moving on to slightly kind of lighter-hearted stuff. I feel I've been a bit preachy. I hope I haven't come across that way. So we do a little bit of research every year, broadly under the auspices of trying to understand what people's dream jobs are. So we ask a very simple question as part of our research, and this is it. So if you could work for any organization, what would it be? Any organization globally. This is my opportunity to get some audience participation for those of you who haven't seen this research before. So number 1, anybody care to shout out an answer? Google, interesting. Yeah, that's the one that everybody always shouts at. So I shall do the big reveal. So number 1 was Virgin. And this has consistently been the number 1 dream job brand in our survey for the last 5 years. So very visible leader in Sir Richard Branson, lots and lots of business units, so appealing to a very kind of broad range of candidates. And actually this one indexes not particularly well with young people. It tends to be more of a middle-aged brand when it comes to popularity. Number 2, you've all said it, Google. Number 3, always a bit of a surprise, but I guess if you're working in healthcare, we know it's the biggest employer in Europe. Number 4, Apple. So Apple and Google, perhaps unsurprisingly, are the ones that are of most appeal to the youngest audience that we're asking. And then number 5, this was a new entry in our top 5, was myself. So people really kind of getting in on the startup act and thinking, well, actually, I could do this for myself and I could do what I do much better. Just to round out that top 10, a couple of new entries, but some decent British brands in there. And it tends to be that the more established the brand, the more likely it is to be a more senior level job seeker. And actually Microsoft is quite an interesting example of that, where the popularity of that answer tends to be slightly older demographic than, for instance, Apple and Google. 66% of us say that we would take a pay cut to work for that brand. So again, food for thought in terms of employer brand in general. And finally, if you could work for any business leader, I think you'll probably all guess the answer to this one. Anybody? Yeah, so there he is. I think Sir Alan Sugar, possibly, or Lord Sugar, whatever his name is. Clearly the power of reality TV driving him forward there. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and just to finish off that list, a few new entries there, but they tend to be the kind of high-profile US tech entrepreneurs, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. So just to finish up, I hope I haven't taken too long. So I guess what we're saying with this research, it's not the most profound research you're ever likely to see, but we think it's really important because it's real-world insights from active job seekers from a range of sectors at a range of levels. They're not all going to be in the same place. So think carefully about how you're going to reach them. Think about when you're going to reach them, what time of day. If you're going to build a campaign in search, is it best that you have your kind of day passing so the lion's share of your budget is spent in the middle of the day? Probably not. You might want to be contacting people the minute they wake up. Show them what you've got. Think about what you need to articulate to be appealing to the audience who is most likely to respond to the vacancies that you have. So we know that young people, it's not necessarily about money, it's about career, it's about convenience, it's about what we can do for them to get them a start on the career ladder. Treat every applicant like a customer, and I think more than that, just think how you would want to be treated, and it's really kind of super simple in that context. If you've got ways of automating communication, I'm sure you all do this anyway, then make sure the tone reflects your employer brand. Make sure it reflects what you want people to think about you, because that applicant might not be the right one for this job, but actually they might be the one that you want to hire in 6 months' time. And finally, if you do all of these things, we would absolutely hope that you'd hire the right talent before your competitors do. And with that, I'll thank you very much and say thanks very much. Cheers.